the moment you get the word, you ought to run. When God gives you a chance at an escape, don't be cute, run after your death. My God, run! Run! Do y'all hear me? Run!
To accomplish something extraordinary, one must have an extraordinary dream. A goal so high, a journey so demanding, that its achievement to most seems impossible.
Let's talk about something important. Put that coffee down.
Passion is your greatest love. Passion is the thing that will help you create the highest expression of your talent. Passion, interest, it's not the same thing. Are you really going to go to your sweetie and say, marry me? You are interesting.
And I don't think you should do just what makes you happy. I think you should do what makes you great. You do not have to be fearless. Just don't let fear stop you.
There are moments when you're going to doubt yourself. There are rough times are going to come, but they have not come to stay. They have come to pass. It's very important for you to know that. Don't say I'm having a bad day. Say I'm having a character building day.
Have I got your attention now? Good.
And welcome back to the Corporate Social Responsibility Podcast, where doing good is good for business and spreading the word can save the world. I am your host, Dan Luchanin, and this week we pick up right where we left off last week with part 2 of my interview with Dr. Holly Duckworth. Now, if you haven't listened to part 1 yet, I would highly recommend pausing the show right here and going and checking out last week's show first. But for those of you who already did listen, you know that Dr. Holly Duckworth is a PhD Chief Learning Officer for Kaiser Aluminum. She is a founding partner of Sherpa Inc., which is a benefit company and leading provider of training and education on sustainability and social responsibility performance improvement. Holly has advanced the continual improvement for social responsibility space with several books that she has authored. Having held executive and senior leadership roles with TRW Automotive and GE, Holly's engineering and industrial backgrounds gives her instant credibility with Sherpa Inc.'s industrial clients. She has a BS in mechanical engineering, an MS in management, and a PhD in industrial and organizational psychology. Holly is an ASQ certified Six Sigma Black Belt, a chair of the ASQ technical community on social responsibility, and certified manager of quality and organizational excellence. She is a certified sustainability associate with the International Society of Sustainability Professionals. So as you can see, she is the perfect guest for the CSR podcast. So let's not waste any time and get into part 2 of my interview with Dr. Holly Duckworth. You previously worked for General Electric, getting back to your earlier years, who I know is credited for really taking Six Sigma to the next level. What did you learn when working with GE? Anything that's practical applications or anything that you figured, well, that didn't work, so this is how I'm going to work moving forward?
Well, I think in those early days of Six Sigma, that was when we learned about the important part of this engagement piece. If you think about, how many people in the organization are really have a job description that is devoted to sustainability, as an example. And my PhD dissertation was actually studying the leadership phenomenon of sustainability organizations. And Dan, I was studying one organization that had 1 million employees globally, and they had 2 people in the sustainability department.
Wow.
And it was the sustainability officer and his administrative assistant. That was it for 1 million employees.
That's amazing.
And so, and it used to be the same in quality and performance improvement. There's this small cluster of engineers or process re-engineering experts, and you can only go so far with those limited resources. But when you start to engage everyone in the organization on performance improvement and process improvement. And we do this by participating on projects. You can't, everybody has their primary role. I might be a payroll clerk or a salesperson or an operations assembly operator, as an example, in a factory. I still have to be an assembly operator. I can't quit being an assembly operator to go work on a social responsibility problem. So
Right.
the key to getting that assembly operator involved in the social responsibility improvement is breaking the problem down into a teeny tiny focus, of a very defined focus of improvement. And we do this by virtue of projects. So we carve out this very doable small scale project. Now we can allow that frontline assembly operator to not assemble an hour a week, let's say, but take that hour and be focused and engaged and participative in that social responsibility improvement. It's this process of breaking down these great big giant projects and great big giant problems into these little teeny tiny doable quants of performance improvement in a project. And I think that's one of my big takeaways from the early days of Six Sigma and working at GE, and this aha moment of, well, we're never going to have enough quality people. We're never going to have enough engineers. We're never going to have enough specialists. What we have to be able to do is we have to unravel a methodology that allows us to get all hands on deck moving forward in the right direction. And the way to do that is breaking these problems down into these very small, doable projects.
Sure, yeah, turning the macro into micro. That really helps for any facet of life, right? I mean, if we really analyze a problem and don't look up at the mountain, but just take it one step at a time, your journey becomes a lot easier.
Exactly. And now look at that organization with 1 million employees. They can have 1 million people in their sustainability department, not 2.
Right, exactly. Still today, oftentimes in organizations, there may only be one supporter. Now, of course, not an organization as big as the one you were previously discussing, but some of these smaller businesses, they may have one supporter, maybe a small department dedicated to sustainability. And that person and the people within that department understand the value and importance of sustainability, but they're not quite sure how to convince people within the organization that they need to take a more radical approach. How can someone effectively communicate the need for sustainability to the decision makers within the organization?
Yeah. And I think it goes back to engagement. There's a lot of research coming out now, Dan, about how employee engagement and employee involvement is linked to job satisfaction. It's linked positively to employee retention. People don't want to be talked at. They don't want to be talked to. They want to be participative. They want to help. They want to be engaged. Yes. And I think that when a sustainability leader is trying to influence others in their organization, even their peers, even other top-level leaders in the organization, don't necessarily want to be preached to. They don't necessarily want to be influenced through a message. They want to be influenced through action. And so finding a way for those others in the organization to really change their work, really change their behavior, and really learn by doing, you get a completely different level of commitment and really going back to a different level of assurance that you're not going to have those irresponsible behaviors in areas of the organization. And then all of your work is for naught. I mean, it's when I was an executive in quality, you lay in bed at night worried about, a recall or a defective part getting to the customer, right? And you just have this perpetual anxiety, right, about well, what's going to go wrong next, right? And our sustainability leaders have the same level of anxiety, or am I going to, what tweets are going on out there for my customers on social media right now? Is there a frontline issue in a airport going viral at the moment, right? And it's keeping me awake at night. And once we shift gears from it's the sustainability is the sustainability leader's responsibility. Once we shift away from that and to say sustainability and social responsibility is everybody's responsibility, then the sustainability leader can sleep better at night.
Yeah, it's funny how that works, right? Now, I read in one of your books that you feel achieving social responsibility performance improvements does not require the hiring of dozens of staff, and it doesn't require the invention of a new tool set. You claim that with a philosophy change, companies can take the resources they already have and deploy them differently for better results. So could you give us a few examples of that?
Yeah, and it just takes a little bit of training. It just takes a little bit of perspective shifting. And so, back to that organization that had 1 million employees and 2 people in the sustainability organization, that's not going to change. I mean, the organization is not suddenly going to be able to, write multi-million-dollar checks to go hire armies of people for their sustainability organization. And I wouldn't recommend that anyway, because then it's just these other, then sustainability is the responsibility of those other people over there in that sustainability department. It's not my responsibility. It's that department's responsibility over there. When we begin to really honestly engage in legitimate sustainability and social responsibility performance improvement through everyone in the organization working on projects and towards performance improvement, then with just a little bit of training, then it becomes everyone's responsibility. Then I can begin to see in my job, regardless of my job, if I'm a C-suite executive or if I'm a frontline employee, I can begin to connect what I do, my job, my responsibilities, and my role to the social responsibility and sustainability of the organization. That means that the organization doesn't have to hire anyone special, which frankly would be harmful anyway because it's that other department. It means that my behavior changes and my skills change because I'm now trained to be aware of what my social responsibility and sustainability risks are in my job. And it usually means my job just got better. We go back to that example of that charitable organization that was working with the adolescent girls that had been trafficked. And their problem was they had a horribly high employee attrition rate. And you know what they ended up doing to improve the social responsibility of the organization? They ended up building a lot of clarity around roles and responsibilities, job descriptions. They improved their new hire training and their onboarding training. They improved their organizational governance in terms of the way they were hiring people and the way they were placing people in jobs. Well, if we think about that type of performance improvement, that type of process improvement of looking at the way employees are hired, the way their job descriptions are written, the way they're trained to do their jobs, that's just good management anyway, right? Right. And so we begin to tackle these really monstrous social responsibility problems. And what so often we uncover is we're really dealing with improving the work life for everybody in the organization in so many ways.
Yeah, beautifully stated. Let's now switching gears here a little bit. Eliminating waste really is the surest way to make any company more efficient. And I know you've spent a good portion of your time concentrating on exactly that. So can you give us a few examples of waste that you see all the time that can be eradicated that maybe some companies aren't doing?
So, one of the ones that really comes to mind quickly, and this is one of those really big, complex, difficult social responsibility problems too. And one of the easy targets for those of us in lean production and Six Sigma is inventory. You might have heard of just-in-time inventory, and sure. And inventory is the bane of lean production. And what inventory means is it's money that the organization has invested in, an aspect of the company that they can't reap a reward from. It's an investment that's tied up and it isn't earning anything. And so therefore we try to try to reduce inventory as much as possible and streamline production processes and services so that we don't have inventory bunched up in different places. And so this ties into social responsibility because right now, I think across the globe, people are really wrestling with this balance between globalization and nationalism. We're seeing it in the United States, we're seeing it in Europe, we're seeing it in China, and people really starting to question, is globalization always good? Right. And when we start to think about, especially in the United States, some of our supply chains being very heavily dependent upon a supply chain that stretches all the way across the Pacific Ocean, right? And how different some of the social responsibility expectations are in different parts of the world. And so then how those sourcing decisions not only contribute to an inventory problem, but they can also contribute to a social responsibility problem. And so it's just interesting to see this globalization, nationalization dilemma being debated and being wrestled with. I hope the end answer isn't one extreme or the other, but I hope that we do begin to really evaluate what is right, what is best, situation by situation, in terms of how much globalization takes place and what are the costs of that in terms of inventory from a productivity standpoint and in terms of social responsibility.
Yeah, absolutely. I hope you're right, and people stop concentrating on the bottom line so much and start taking the big picture in the totality. That's when change happens, and we're seeing it a lot now, more so than ever before, and that's certainly encouraging. Now, in your book, you mentioned that allowing waste in the workplace is actually stealing from our children. Would you care to elaborate on that? I find that as an interesting comment.
Yeah, one of the stories that we use to teach people about sustainability, Dan, is the story of Congo Gumi. In English, you spell it Kongo, one word, and the second word Gumi, Gumi. It's a Japanese company, the name of a Japanese company. And we use Congo Gumi as a case study, and you can Google Congo Gumi. There's lots that's been written about it. Congo Gumi is a construction company in Japan that is focused, they have kind of a unique focus. They're focused on building Buddhist temples, amongst other types of construction projects, but primarily Buddhist temples. And as you can imagine, there are very strict standards and specifications for Buddhist temples, so having an expertise in that is important. The interesting thing about Congo Gumi is that they started business in 578 AD. They're considered the oldest company in the world.
Wow.
At least that we have records of. So for 1,500 years, think about this, an organization has had, for Buddhist temples, has had trees because they have to be made out of wood, has had wood products, raw materials for 1,500 years. They've had carpenters and architects for 1,500 years. They've had to have safe communities in which to build. You can't build a temple in the middle of a war zone, so they've had to have safe communities to build in for 1,500 years. They've had to have customers. They've had to have Buddhists for 1,500 years, right? And so we begin to think about the entire network, the entire space of stakeholders for Congo Gumi, and how sustainable they've had to be for 1,500 years. And so they had to be thinking, they had to be constantly innovating, and not just on their products, but innovating in their organizational governance and innovating in their labor practices and innovating in their operating practices and innovating in ways of community development to sustain themselves. And so we use this as an example to say that, we don't approach sustainability and social responsibility as some sort of charitable outreach. This isn't about philanthropy. This isn't about writing checks to some charity. This is about thinking about how your organization is going to be successful 1,500 years from now? How are you going to make sure that you have employees in the next generation? How are you going to make sure you have raw materials in the next generation? How are you going to make sure that you have customers in the next generation? How are you going to make sure that you have safe communities in the next generation? Not out of a charitable desire, but out of a very selfish desire to perpetuate the organization.
Right. Yeah, that's the very definition of sustainability. And it kind of ties into something that I read from you again. You want scissor as an applicable methodology in the year 3516. Now, when I first read that, I was like, that is a lofty goal. But looking at that case study, it actually does seem like it's plausible.
Right.
I mean,
and just, Congo Gumi didn't sit down in 578 and say,
right.
gee, what are we going to be doing in 2017? But they did approach their responsibilities. They did approach their decisions and actions for the future generation to perpetuate the goodness, the profit of the organization for the next generation. And if every generation does that, then you'll get to 3516.
Right, exactly. It's sometimes people think that sustainability is this new philosophy that people have just came up with in the 80s or 90s or what have you. But to your point, all you have to do is look at any long-lasting company, and by long I mean extremely long, to really see it just makes sense. They had to have some type of sustainability at least on their mind, or maybe they got lucky, but generally that's not the case. So any company that's flourished over a long period of time has sustainability at the heart of their business model. That is a proven fact, and I think your case study certainly supports that. Now, getting back to the children, let's talk about your kids' book series, Parables for Prosperity. I've not had a chance to check it out personally, but I'm interested to hear what it's all about.
Sure. So we have 3 of 7 books written. So this is a work in process. And let me inform as to why there are 7 books. So we use the international standard ISO 26000 as our baseline in our scissor methodology. And ISO 26000 is the international standard of social responsibility. And so we think it's very important to have that international standard as a framework to build from. In ISO 26000, there are defined 7 subjects of social responsibility. And these are organizational governance, human rights, fair operating practices, fair labor practices, environmental protection, consumer protection and consumer issues, and community involvement and development. And so our goal is to write a book on each of these 7 subjects of social responsibility. And so what we've done in Parables for Prosperity is we've taken these really dry international standard requirements that are written in legalese for engineers and such, and we've turned them into fun stories.
That's
so
ingenious.
For example, for example, one of our children's books, these are pre-reader books. These are for 3 to 7-year-olds, lap books that a parent would read to the child. And they're beautifully illustrated, and we've sourced our illustrations from all over the world. Nice. So we have illustrators from Pakistan and Macedonia and Poland, and so we've wanted the artwork to be global in nature. But our book on fair labor practices, which is kind of a really technical subject there.
You think?
Is called it's called The Legend of the Kaleidoscope Maker. And it's this story where we have the land of Calais, and the artists are very well respected, and everybody knows that Calais is the place where beautiful art is made. And one day, Sebastian, one of the artists, he invents the kaleidoscope. And everybody's enthralled in the kaleidoscope. And Calais is a beautiful place with brilliant seamstresses and musicians and fishermen, and everybody is really participating in the community to the best of their ability. But then when Sebastian invents the kaleidoscope maker, everybody wants to build kaleidoscopes, and they make art from what they see in the kaleidoscopes. So everybody's painting paintings from the kaleidoscopes. And so the cooks stop cooking, and the musicians stop making music, and the seamstresses stop sewing, and everybody abandons their skill and craft to become an artist. And of course, then the wealthy art buyers travel on their ships to Calais to come and purchase the best of the best art, because that's what Calais is known for. But now that all of the art is being produced by musicians and cooks and seamstresses, it's really not very good art. And so the value of the art decreases, and the art buyers storm off. And Sebastian learns his lesson that it's important for everybody to play their role in the community and to participate in their in your skill and your craft. And only by having a diversity of skill and craft in the community is the community beautiful and vibrant. And so that's our little story about labor practices for a 3-year-old.
That is amazing. I love it. That is the type of literature we need for our children. And I mean that. That is an ingenious idea. That is a book I would certainly read to my child, for sure. When do you think that you're going to be finished with this collection?
Oh, I don't know. It's been a slow process. So we have the book on labor practices finished. We have a book on consumer issues called Grandmother's Tea. That one's finished, and we're in final production of a book on organizational governance called Little Chiku and the Crystal Mountains.
I love it. It's a lot better than the little Goldilocks we used to read about when we were children. I mean, that is a massive improvement for our kids, and it gets them thinking. It gets their brains working on that level at a young age, and that cannot be undervalued. I mean, that is our future right there. So good for you. I love that idea. I can't wait till you come out with it. You'll have to send me an email so I could check it out, because that excites me. I think it's really cool. Obviously, you're a well-accomplished author. What's prompted you to write these books and to get your stuff out there? A lot of people don't have the intestinal fortitude. They say they want to, but wanting to and actually going through and fulfilling the promise they made to themselves is a much harder thing. How have you done it, and what's prompted you to do it?
Right. I got some brilliant wisdom many, many, many years ago. And as most wise mentors give wisdom, it was prompted by a failure.
It's funny how that works.
And so I had been complaining to a dear friend of mine. This was before I started working on my PhD, and we would have lunch regularly, and I would voice my desire to have a PhD, and we would chat about that. And this went on for years. This went on for 3 years. And finally, this dear friend of mine got upset and angry with me, and she slammed her fist down on the lunch table at one of my waxing and waning conversations about wanting to get my PhD. And she said to me, Holly, if you started your PhD when you started talking about your PhD, you'd be halfway finished by now.
Nice.
I'm like, oh, you're right. You're so right. And so just like the scissor methodology, you know how I write a book? 1 page at a time. And so I have an objective for myself to write 1 page every day. There's a new one in the works right now, but I write 1 page and 1 page only at a time. And I don't worry about editing. It's just, I'm just getting my thoughts on paper. I'll fill in the gaps with the research and references and editing later. But what's important is to just breaking that big, giant, seemingly insurmountable problem down into a little tiny focus, a little tiny quant of improvement. So 1 page a day, that's all it takes.
That's actually great advice for any aspiring authors out there, is don't feel like it has to be done overnight. You've been working on your book of 7 books for a while. 1 page at a time. That's the right approach. And you stay fresh every time you pick up that pen and get to writing. You have a fresh mind. I think that's a great approach. And obviously, we see that the scissor approach has served you well in just about every facet of your life. I mean, that's pretty fantastic. It's like a philosophy, a core philosophy to live by, not just to practice your business by as well. Now, I know I can't believe we've been talking for an hour already. It feels like it's been 10 minutes, but I can't let you go without asking you about your permaculture farm. Please explain to the listeners exactly what that is and how you're implementing it in your own backyard there in Colorado, right?
Yeah, I'm in Durango, Colorado, which is the southwest corner of Colorado. It's nowhere close to Denver. It's a 7-hour drive to Denver. And my husband and I live in a genuine log cabin, a very small 1 bedroom, 1 bath log cabin, historic log cabin on 3 acres of property at almost 7,000 feet elevation.
Wow.
We're in a valley nestled in between 2 mountains. And when I look out my back porch, I'm looking at a 13,900 foot peak. So not quite a 14er, but close.
You lucky
And
dog.
so
That sounds amazing.
it's beautiful. But we have a real serious farming challenge.
Sure,
A very short growing season, very high elevation, which means that the sun is very intense and can sunburn trees.
Right.
So I have 23 hazelnut trees. I have a small grove of apple trees. I have apricot trees, pear trees, and cherry trees. And when we talk about permaculture, we're not talking about an orchard where all of the trees are in straight rows and we mow underneath the trees and we spray the trees with insecticide and we fertilize the trees. When we build a food forest, it really looks like a forest. And so we don't mow underneath the trees. The trees aren't in rows, they're all in clusters. And we intentionally plant nitrogen fixing trees amongst the fruit trees. So I have Siberian pea bush and honey locusts, and I have other beneficial trees planted amongst the fruit trees. And that helps to protect the fruit trees from shade it from our intense sun because of the altitude. And it also helps to protect my fruit trees from wind and cold and damage in that way. So it's kind of cool because you're taking a systems viewpoint of orcharding and fruit growing and letting nature do what nature does best without a lot of intervention. And so you end up with an orchard where it takes a lot of planning, it takes a lot of thought, it takes some know-how. I have some great mentors in that regard that have helped me choose plants and choose locations. But once you have it all grown, it's a lazy person's orchard because
Right.
we don't prune trees, we don't spray trees, we don't fertilize trees, we don't do anything. We just go out and pick fruit when it's ready. So a lot of work up front for a lot of benefit later.
You call it lazy. I call it the garden for someone who works in sustainability because that's what it's that's the very definition right there is let Mother Nature do its job and plant accordingly. I think that's fantastic. If I had the acreage, I would do it myself. And also you're taking away the reliance on government and, of course, the supermarket. You have it all right there in your backyard, and I think that's fantastic. So good for you, and I encourage everyone to do it. Would you as well? Would you say everyone should do this, or it's not for the weak at heart?
Even for very small gardens, I would encourage people to go study permaculture concepts. And the systems thinking that's applied in permaculture isn't only applied in the growing of food. You can apply it in other areas of your life. So definitely encourage people to study permaculture. It's a cool concept.
Without question. Holly, I want to thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to talk with me today. I think the knowledge you provided for me is truly invaluable, and it was just a darn good discussion. I really enjoyed talking to you, and I appreciate everything that you're doing for the CSR landscape and moving forward with a good metric system. I think that's going to change the way people do business, and I think you're doing a great service for companies and for the world, and I truly mean that. So keep up the great work, and I wish you nothing but continued success.
Thank you, Dan.
So there you have it, folks. Part 2 of my interview with Dr. Holly Duckworth is in the books, and what a great guest she was. Again, I mentioned this last week. In the podcast description, I will list her website and the 3 books that she has authored, and I advise you guys to definitely check it out. As you can tell, Holly, an absolute expert in this space with decades of experience. And what I love about it is she is taking it all and she's come out with her own philosophy on the other side to help her business work. And as you guys have heard throughout the interview, not just using it at work, but using it in her life to tackle the most complex of problems. As we talked about, you tackle the micro, not the macro, one step at a time, and you could accomplish anything. And that's what I really took away from this interview. And I can't wait to check out the books that Holly has written so I can dive just a little bit deeper. But I want to thank Holly again, and I want to thank each and every one of you for continuing to listen and support the show. And if you'd like to be a guest on the show, I'd love to have you on. Just get in touch with me. I'm available on Twitter at the CSR Podcast, or you can send me an email, dan@iouconcepts.com. Again, if you'd like to be a guest, I'd love to have you on. As you've heard throughout the brief 10-episode period in this show, we've had some real thought-provoking stuff, and I always love when people push the envelope and they change the game. So if you're a leader in the CSR space, if you're doing stuff that other people are not, I'd love to have you on, pick your brain, and educate the masses. So again, feel free to get in touch because I truly do believe that spreading the word can save the world, and doing good is good for business. Until next week, I am Dan Luchanin, reminding each and every one of you to live responsibly ever after.